Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Ben, and welcome to another Godot tutorial video. This video is part of our auto runner tutorial series, the penguin sledding game. In this video, we're going to be creating a finish line so we can actually finish the level and a restart button. We'll also probably be doing a timer if there's time, ironically. Let's start by creating our finish line. We already have this sprite down here, the finish.png sprite, and it's kind of a checkerboard. We want to be able to display this as like a finish flag, like checkerboarded and tiled across the screen. The easiest way to tile a sprite inside of Godot is using the texture rect node, which is actually a control node. Usually control nodes are actually for UI related elements. But in this case, it's actually useful for this. So let's do a plus button up here to create a new scene. We'll go to other node and then we'll type in texture rect. And we'll add that. I'm going to click 2D so we can come to the 2D tab. I'm going to drag over the finished PNG to the texture property. Now, if we scale it right now, you can see it just scales the sprite. But if we come to stretch mode and we set it to tile, now it scales tiled and we get that checkerboard flag. Let's call this finish line and save it with Control S. Come back to the level. I'm going to find the finish line scene down here and drag it in. And then you could have it start out kind of the size that you want. That will make it easier when you're adding this to each level. Although now I see that it didn't update to reflect that change, interestingly. I wonder if I close level and then reopen it. Whoa, it's just gone. Okay. I must not have saved, I assume. That was surprising. So I'm going to stick it like right here. That's fine for now. And then, of course, I could adjust it in here if I wanted to. Now let's run the game, and we should be able to get to this finish line. There we go. Now, a few problems. Our player goes behind it. So come back to the finish line. Over here in the properties, there's an ordering section. And inside of that section, we have a z-index. The z-index essentially describes how close the sprite is to the camera. So a lower Z index pushes it back away, farther away from the camera. And a higher Z index brings it closer. It's the opposite of what I'm used to from my game maker days, which was the exact opposite. So we're going to set this to be -10. That would be a lower value, pushing it farther away from the camera, making it behind the player. Let's double check to make sure I'm not crazy. There we go. Player's in front of it now. We want to be able to detect when the player crosses this finish line. Now we could do this using an area 2D, or we could create a big giant area over it, and maybe that is the easiest option here if we just scale it up big enough so that we can use it for every single level, and then just put a big area over it and detect when we've collided with the player. The other solution, and this is what I actually used in the game jam, was I just detected whether the player had crossed a certain X value in the scene. I like that solution too. Both of them work pretty well. The X value one is safer if your player ever manages to go outside of the level in a way you don't expect. They can still hit the finish line even if they don't technically overlap with the exact finish line, because they're eventually going to cross that X value. So it is safer in that sense. Let's go with that approach. But if you do ever want to detect overlap, area 2D is your node. So let's do a new script, add to finish line. And we're going to need to get access to our player. So this is a common question in Godot, which is how can we make two nodes communicate with each other? In this case, we can actually get access to the player through an exported variable. Since both the player and the finish line are going to be in the same scene, in the same level scene. You can't always do this, but this is one of the cases where we can. So we're going to use that. Come into your player script, and we're going to give our player script a class name. Class name player. Now, without going into too much of the complexities of how this works, giving it a class name allows you to reference this script's type in the same way that character body 2D is a type. We now have a player type, and we can reference this type in other places in our code in sort of like a global scope way. We're adding this. This is now a reference to the player's script resource, and that's a little more complicated than maybe you needed, but just know that you can now use player as a type in other places in your code. There we go. So we can create a new variable. We can say export var player, and this export type will be of type player, right? There is our player and now access. In our player script, we need a finish line x value variable. We'll call this finish x. And by default, we'll set it equal to -1. Back in the finish line, in our ready, we can then say player dot finish x equals global position dot, let's see, global position dot x. I wonder why it's red like that. It's mad at me for something. Texture rect. We come into control. Does it have a global position? Are they depreciating it? Is that why it's red? I see global position here. I don't see any depreciated thing here. I don't know why. I don't know why it's red, why it showed red in the autocomplete, but just make sure that it's not depreciated. Again, constantly referencing the documentation. Okay. Player.finish x equals global position dot x. So now we're setting the x position of our finish line as the global, or as the player's finish x. However, there's a problem with this, which is that if we run our level, but we haven't actually set the player, we're going to get an error message. We're going to say assignment of property or key finish x with value of type float on object base type nil. That sounds complicated, but essentially Godot is just saying we can't set a finish x value on a player that is nil, that doesn't exist. Now we could make a better error here for ourselves. We could say assert player is player. You forgot to set the player on your finish line. Like this. Now let's run the game. And that assertion allows us to get a better error, right? You forgot to set the player on your finish line. Oh, okay. So now we go into our level, click on the finish line, we click on our player export variable, and we assign it to the player. Okay, now we can run the game. No error messages, right? So it's useful to use assertions like this. We were just checking to make sure that the player variable was actually a player and that it wasn't null. So you could also say player does not equal, or player equals null. That could work too, but I prefer using is here. There we go. Now we have our finish line. So let's go into the player's physics process, and we can do this up at the top actually. We can say if global position.x is greater than finish x, and finish x does not equal -1. What are we going to do? Let's actually, what we'll do is we'll freeze the player character. If you come over to the process, you can see that it has a process mode, and you can set process mode to disabled right here. And that just makes it so the node no longer runs any of its process functions. Physics process, normal process. It essentially pauses the node if you set it to disabled. So when we've crossed the finish line, we'll just say process mode equals disabled. Let's see. Process mode disabled. There we go. Process mode equals process mode disabled. Let's see if it works. And there we go. We finished the level. Now we did get an error message down here. So let's see what we got here. Body get space is null. So my suspicion here is that because we disabled process mode up here and then called move and slide down here, we got an error message. So the problem is we're immediately disabling the process mode and it's affecting the rest of our code. Now I think we could move this to the end of our script, of our process function here, and that would solve the problem. But I don't really like that solution because it's not very clear that I'd rather move this into a function anyways and then use call deferred. And we can talk about call deferred. So let's grab this right here. I'm going to do Control X and we're going to create a new function. Check for finish line. I'll just have it return void. We'll just paste this in here. So we have our check for finish line function. Now we can come up here to the top and we can say check for finish line dot call deferred. So that just defers the calling of this function until the end of our process and our physics process. It's just going to wait till the very end of everything that has happened. Let's see if this works. There we go. No error message. So that did work exactly how I'd expect it to. Now let's, just for the sake of understanding our code better and for science, let's go to the end of our function here and try calling check for finish line to see if it would work if we just called it at the very end like this instead of calling deferred. There we go. Yep, it works as well. So just as I suspected, it does seem to be that we were setting process to disabled and then calling move and slide. We can technically move it to the end here. You can do whichever you feel is best, but I like having the check for finish up here with call deferred. I also think call deferred is safer because if you were to add more code after it potentially, it could mess it up again. But using call deferred, we just know that it's always going to be done at the very end of this node's processing. And so the lesson here is setting process mode should be done through call deferred. In fact, now that I'm thinking about it, it might actually be best to say set deferred process mode disabled, like this. This is the safest way to do it. And then we can just call it up here because we're setting it deferred anyway. Like that. Whoa, that was crazy. Glitch there. There we go. We'll have to look into that. We get a little bit of it. It was like an interesting jump off the wall, right? What? How did I do that? Weird. It's like I released the jump button right at the right time to get like a super jump off the slope. If any of you figure out how to reproduce that glitch, let me know in the comments below. Okay, we can do a restart button real quick. We probably don't have time for the timer. So let's go into the top of our physics process here, and we'll just say if input.isAction just pressed UI cancel or escape. No, it's UI cancel. UI cancel. And then I think we can do get tree dot reload current scene. That should allow us to press the escape key to restart the level. Yep. We did get an error though. So let's read our error. Process. We're having issues with our process stuff again. Okay. Seems very familiar, right? You have any ideas of how we might be able to solve this problem? Reload current scene dot call deferred. Maybe? Yep, no longer getting the error message. Whenever we're doing something that needs to happen at the end of the... Okay, I deserved that one. So we can't restart the level once we finish the level, and that's because we put the code for restarting the level inside of the physics process, but we're disabling the process on this node, so now this code is no longer running. Yeah, let's move this code into the restart code into our level. We're going to add a script for our level real quick, and then inside of process, we'll just do this. We might not have to do get deferred anymore since it's not inside of the player. I just copied and pasted it over here. Let's remove get deferred. We hit that lesson pretty hard. Yeah, it works fine without doing it now. Okay. And then we can finish the level and we can restart the level with the escape key. Perfect. That's going to be it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. If you're interested in my Godot courses, I have a bundle for sale right now on my website that you can check out, and I will see you all in the next video.